Hello class. This is the Writing 2 guide for Unit 4 for the second writing. So to start, just a reminder, whenever you're doing another writing, it's always helpful to download this PPT so you can get that on eClass. And you should download this before you start your writing and keep looking back to it during the writing, and even after, once you've finished your writing, take another look and just make sure you got everything. Alright, so next, for this writing, for writing 2, you're going to have to write 3 to 5 complex sentences that start with an independent clause, and 3 to 5 complex sentences that start with a dependent clause. So how many total sentences do you need to write? Well, it's really up to you, but I would say 6 is the minimum. So when you're doing this, make sure that you're not copying any of your clauses. So for example, if you made a sentence that starts with an independent clause, and the sentence is, the students learn while Jamie teaches English. You could not make another sentence, make a dependent clause that starts with while Jamie teaches English, even though the independent clause, his students listen to him, is unique. That would just be kind of like copying, and that would be lazy. So I want you to try and make all new sentences. So something like this would work. Although Jamie likes soccer, he's too old. I guess I should say he's too old to play. Anyways. Next. So for your writing, all the writings need to be typed and written on a computer and printed out and bring it to class. Part of the reasons, remember, one of the reasons that I want you to write it on the computer is so that you can save it and look at it again when you need to do the writing fix at the end of the term. So if you want to fix this writing, it'll be easier to do that if you have it saved on your computer. Also, just remember that students that write by hand, that don't type and print their writing, will lose points, and students that email me the writing will also lose points. And students that don't have the paper at the beginning of the class will lose points, right? It's homework, so you need to bring it to class and be ready. So just remember, don't wait until 5 minutes before class to go find a printer and print it. Print it the night before, and that way you don't have a problem. So the reason I have this rule is so that I have your paper and I can read it, but also some students' handwriting is bad, like my handwriting, so typing is better. It's easier for me to read, and that way I don't mark as many mistakes on your paper as well. The next part that you'll be graded for is the format. So on your paper at the very top, it should say Writing 2, your name, your student number or student ID, and the class day and time. So for example, Tuesday 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. on the top left corner. And remember, you can always you can go to eClass and download this PPT, and then you can click on this little link here, and then you can download the Word document. Just remember that you have to change your information. Don't use my information, right? Because if you give me a paper with my name, your name, you'll lose points. And next, we're going to look at the content. So I'm pretty I don't grade content too hard, as you probably know by now, just because everybody's content's going to be a little unique and different. But just remember that your sentences need to be clear and understandable, so they should kind of make sense, and they should also be unique. And just remember, oops, sorry about that. So the sentences should be unique. So that means that I don't want you to copy your independent and dependent clauses between sentences, but also I don't want you copying from other students or from the internet. So I will be checking to see if you copied your sentences from the internet. So just to be clear, you will lose points if your sentences are too difficult to understand, and if your sentences aren't unique enough, so like maybe you repeat ideas or reuse information too much, then you would lose points for that. The next grading category is editing. So this includes things like grammar, spelling, punctuation. We need to have these correct because these help make your writing understandable. Also, don't ever use the ... or etc. or anything like that. These are not used in formal writing. You really only see this like in presentations or notes, stuff like that. These are not used in our style of writing. And to find your editing score, what I do is I count how many sentences you wrote. So if you wrote 6 sentences, that would be the total number of sentences, and then I count the total number of mistakes, and so I divide the mistakes over the sentences. So if you had, well, in the example here, it says if you had 16 mistakes and 4 sentences divided by 4, that would be 4, so this would be minus 4 points. Usually it's not that bad, but one tip to remember: always read your writing after you finish writing it. Do that before you print your writing, so that you can catch your mistakes. Because oftentimes we make our writings and we think we write it correctly, and then when we read it again, we see that we made simple little mistakes. Especially for punctuation, right? Don't forget your periods or your end marks. Those are all needed. So the next category is effort. So to earn a high effort score, you'll need to use a variety of subjects. So don't just write about yourself in all 6 or 8 sentences. Or all 6 or 10 sentences. Try to change the subjects. Or don't write all about me. I know you want to. And also, writing the most sentences will get you the highest score. So for this assignment, you have to write 3 to 5 sentences. Actually, 6 to 10 sentences. So if you wrote 10 sentences, you would get the highest effort score. If you wrote 9, you'd get a little... 9 you'd be okay. 8 you'd get a lower score, and so on and so forth. So just more is better, but if you go over 10, I won't be checking those sentences, so I'll only check the maximum. Next, bonus points. So I don't have the bonus points here because I might have changed them on the paper. And you can also get the writing guide check sheet or checklist on eClass, and that will have the bonus points. So just remember that to get the bonus points, you need to correctly complete the sentences. So even though you use the grammar, it needs to be done correctly. So make sure you have the correct form. And also underline the full sentence. So don't just underline the one word in the grammar point. Underline the full sentence so that way I can see it clearly. That shows me that you also understand and know what the grammar point is. Okay? So that's really all there is for the Writing To guide. And since this is complex sentences, I feel like it's probably a good opportunity to go back and do a little review of complex sentences. So we're going to do that now. So we kind of learned a little bit of this, if you remember, when we talked about simple sentences. An independent clause is a complete thought. We could say the same thing about a simple sentence. So it can stand alone. It doesn't need more information. Like, for example, this sentence, Manchester United won the EPL in 1997. So we could just put a little period or end mark here, and it becomes a simple sentence. And yeah, that's an independent clause. So a dependent clause is only a part of a sentence and is not a complete thought. It needs more information. So for example, this statement here says, even though they only scored 75 points. So it has the subject they, and it has the verb scored. So it looks like a sentence, but it's still missing information. So we can't add a full stop to this and make it a sentence. If you did that in your writing, you would lose points for content because it wouldn't really make sense. Okay. So to fix this, we need to add an independent clause. So the most common way would be to start with the independent clause first, like this: Manchester United won the EPL in 1997. Then add the dependent clause, even though they only scored 75 points. So this is kind of the easiest way to do it. And once we put those two together, we can add the end mark or add the period at the end, and make it a full sentence. Or we could alternatively also start with the dependent clause first, like this: even though they only scored 75 points, comma, then we add the independent clause, Manchester United won the EPL in 1997. So one thing to note here is this comma. So these complex sentences are the same, just the order is different. We have the dependent clause first, and when the dependent clause comes first, there needs to be a comma at the end of the dependent clause before we put in the independent clause. And the reason for that is because of this even though here, this phrase even though. So I have a little example here to test you. So these two statements are together, so all you have to do is read them and think about, do we need to add a comma or not? So for example, until Captain Cook returned from his voyage to Tahiti, tattooing was not known in the Western world. So do you need to add a comma? I'll give you 10 seconds to think about this. Alright, so you probably got it. Yes, you do need to add a comma. And then once you also, in addition to adding the comma, you also need to add the period or the full stop here. So it's always dependent clause, comma, independent clause. So don't forget that. Otherwise, you would be missing punctuation in your writing, and that might cause you to lose points in your writing. So don't forget that comma, and then also the full stop. So how about this one? Do we need a comma here? Tattooing was not known in the Western world until Captain Cook returned from his voyage to Tahiti. So I'll give you 10 seconds to think about that. Okay, so the correct answer is no, we don't need it because the independent clause comes first. Oh, and I put that there already. So, we have three types of sentences we have learned. We learned about the simple sentence. For example, it was raining, full stop. We have our compound sentences. It was raining, so I took the bus. So remember, words like so are fanboys, right? Or, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so, right? So we use that to put two simple sentences together. And a complex sentence could look something like this. When I took the bus, it was raining. So dependent clause first, then the independent clause. So we have the comma. So we have for our compound sentences, we have the fanboys, like we talked about, and we use those to put together two simple sentences. Or another way to say that is we use that to put together two independent clauses. But the complex sentence has a dependent clause and an independent clause, but no fanboy. It just has it might have a comma depending on our order, right? So the dependent clause will always start with something that is called a subordinating conjunction. So this list here is just an example of a few subordinating conjunctions. So these could be, these will always be at the start of a dependent clause. And when you see this, that should be a clue that you either need to add a comma or that it's part of the other idea. It's almost like a compound sentence. So you don't need to remember all of these. It's helpful to know quite a few, but just be aware. You can always come to eClass and download these, or download this PPT, which actually is a good idea for this assignment. Go back and try to see if you can try and use new ones. Always try to use new subordinating conjunctions. That way you get better at using them, and you might learn a few. So now I'm going to give you some time to make some complex sentences. If you're watching this with a friend or with another classmate, this activity will make a lot more sense. If you're doing this on your own, then you'll still be able to do it. It'll just be, I guess, a little more boring. Anyways, for this activity, you'll need a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen. And what I want you to do is write 3 dependent clauses. And you can write about any topic. When we wrote our simple sentences and compound sentences, we wrote about hobbies and lunch. You can choose those as your topics, or you can write about something else. So I'm going to give you 6 minutes to do this. So ready, 3, 2, 1, go. Alright, so I know I said about 6 minutes, but we'll just stop it there. I think that's probably enough time. So, your dependent clauses probably should look something like, hold on a second. Something like this. Oops, no. While English is my favorite subject, and although it is late and because Jenny rode her bike to school, I'll say to work. So something like this. Yours obviously will be different, but should look like that. So starting with the dependent clauses first. Now, if you have somebody else with you, the next thing you'll need to do is trade your paper with your partner and make 3 independent clauses and turn these into complex sentences. So I'm going to give you another 5 minutes to do that. Ready and go. Oh, and don't forget when you add the independent sentences or independent clauses to these sentences, you'll need to have these commas, right? So, for example, because Jenny rode her bike to work, she was very tired, right? So go ahead and keep working on your independent clauses. Okay, so that should be enough time. So you can go ahead and give your paper back to your partner and take a look at the sentences. You should see stuff maybe like this. English is my favorite subject. So something like this. Hopefully your sentences are a bit more fun. Yeah, that would be pretty much it for complex sentences. Just remember, these three start with the dependent clauses. For your assignment, you'll need to do 3 to 5 that start with the dependent clause, and then another 3 to 5 that start with the independent clause. However, before I finish, there's one other thing I want to point out, which is when I talked about finished talking about complex sentences last time. I talked about a trick you can use to help do bigger or longer writings, or to help make your writings more interesting. So the one thing that I always tell students that's really important is use a mix of simple, compound, and complex sentences, right? So you don't want to just use compound and complex sentences. I know that a lot of teachers tell their students write big, long sentences. Sometimes that's necessary, but more often it's better to have a mix of all three of these. That way your writing has something like a rhythm, or has more feeling. It's not so robotic. It's not so boring. So the trick that I want to talk about is using. Let's see. So we had independent clauses, right? And we have simple sentences. So your independent clause might look like we are studying math. And your simple sentence could be exactly the same, just with a end mark or full stop, right? So exactly the same except the dot. So the trick that I always tell students is to only write when you're making your writing. Let's say you have to do 6 sentences for your assignment, and let's say this is you need to make let's say a 6-sentence paragraph. So to do this, you should write at least 10 simple sentences. So the reason you would write 10 simple sentences, well, let me show you first. So for example, there's one. Okay, so right now I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences. And the reason all of these are simple sentences is because if I just write simple sentences, I make fewer mistakes. It's much shorter and easier to write. Then the trick is to make this writing more interesting is to go back and add either subordinating conjunctions. So just remember words like these. So we can add subordinating conjunctions either at the beginning or the middle of sentence, or we can add fanboys, right? So that way we can start making complex and compound sentences. So we walked to the park. I'll just leave that there. That'll be my simple sentence. Oops, that'll be a simple sentence. And then next one, my friend John asked me for some money. However, I said I didn't have any. So I used however here. I could have used but. I could have used although. I could have used a lot of other words, right? But by adding a however here and deleting that end mark, I've changed this into a complex sentence. And so now we've got a little bit more style from these first two sentences. So we had 5 sentences, now we have 4, right? So we've got less sentences, but we've got more style. So that's why I would say write more sentences, or more simple sentences. Next, let's move on and let's make this a compound sentence since we've already got complex. So he went to the bank to get some money. I'll say, but he found some money on the ground. And then we could even delete the word money there to make it shorter. He found some on the ground, right? So this now becomes 3 sentences, even though we started with 5. So usually, if your paragraph has to be, let's say, 5 sentences, you want to write not 10 simple sentences, but maybe 8 or 9 simple sentences, and then go back and change some of the simple sentences into compound and complex sentences. And that way you've got a very easy way of making your writing style better, adding some rhythm to your writing, and also you have a very easy way of making compound and complex sentences so that you don't make more mistakes, and it's just easier for you. It's easier for most students to do that. So if you have any questions about anything that was talked about in these videos, you can always come meet me at the end of class. Don't forget, you can find these PPTs on eClass, and these videos will be on eClass for a long time, so you can always go back and get them. All right, have a good day or night. Take care.